Hello, my name is David Wortley. I'm the CEO and founder of 360 Immersive Experiences, and I'd like to welcome you to this online talk on the future of communications technologies. Before we start, those of you who are in Facebook or in YouTube, you're very welcome to type in any comments or questions into the chat area. So without further ado, I'll get underway with the presentation. This presentation is part 3 of a series of presentations looking at how technology has changed during my lifetime. And so over the next few weeks, I'm going to be covering all of these different areas where I've seen remarkable changes in the way technology has impacted business and society. And I'm looking at these changes in technology from the perspective of being a baby boomer. And it's my generation that I consider to be the most fortunate generation in history because of the remarkable changes that I've witnessed in my lifetime. But I hope that it will also be of interest not only to baby boomers like myself, who will be able to relish the nostalgia and shared experiences and be able to identify with the world that I've lived through. But also I want to engage the next generation to bring their fresh minds and perspectives, and also invite those of you who are interested in the future of technology and how that's going to affect business and society to join me on my journey through these technologies. So we're talking about communications and human development. And the first point I'd like to make is that we all have a need to communicate, and this need is embedded into the DNA of all living creatures. And I'm including this not just human beings and animals, but also plants and anything which has life and is not inanimate. And human beings are fortunate because they can use their intelligence and the power of communications technologies, and they're motivated to overcome their physical limitations and the barriers of time and space. So one of the remarkable things that I think that's happened in my life is that after 200,000 years of evolution, from the time when human beings began to speak and communicate to each other, we've now find ourselves in the last 20 years, or in the space of one generation, or less than 0.01% of human history, where we've had a quantum change from evolution to revolution. And we've gone from an analog world to a digital world. And the role that communications technologies play in civilization and human development cannot be understated. So the fact that human beings have intelligence and the power of power of language and location has enabled them over generations to use these powers to develop tribal communities, which in turn have led to the development of empires and dynasties. And what we've seen over recent times, how civilization is evolving over ever-shortening timescales. And these ever-shortening timescales are driven by improvements in communications technologies. So to quickly go back in time, if we want to look at differentiating two different types of communication: synchronous communication, which you'll see conversations between primitive cavemen, and asynchronous communications, which represented by cave drawings. So these are forms of communication which don't take place in real time. But the impact of communications on human development is constrained by time and space. So as civilization has developed, we've seen changes in synchronous communication as witnessed by the Roman foreman, and asynchronous communication, the power of hieroglyphics and language and writing. But with synchronous communications, the power of synchronous communications is in building relationship, shaping opinions and calls to action. And these conversations and communications take place in the same time and space. The challenge of synchronous communications is that without any kind of technology, human beings are constrained by their physical limitations, and these restrict them to being able to communicate in the same time and space. The challenge of asynchronous communications, however, asynchronous communications, like the Egyptian hieroglyphics that you see here, which are being witnessed and interpreted by experts literally thousands of years after they were created, they overcome the barriers of time and space, but they are quite limited in their ability to build human relationships. So human beings have sought throughout history to find ways to overcome these barriers. And because our vision is more powerful over distance than our hearing, we try to overcome these barriers of time and space by implementing certain technologies. I've shown a couple here, like the burners that you see, the beacons that you see, which can be seen over a long distance, and technologies like semaphore. But it's this combination of synchronous and asynchronous communication that really helps to develop human civilization. So here is an example of teachers using a form of asynchronous communication, i.e. a book, and they're using this in a form of synchronous communication with their students. So this combination of synchronous and asynchronous combination is very, very powerful. Some of the key developments in history which have had an impact on both synchronous and asynchronous technology, examples like Roman roads and the printing press. And it's these kinds of communications technologies which have overcome in history the barriers of time and space and introduced humanity to the concept of mass communications. And mass communications combine asynchronous technologies like the printed page and books with communications technologies like the railway, which enable these kind of asynchronous communications to be disseminated over a wider area in a shorter timescale. So as history has progressed, we've been able to tackle these time and space barriers and bring a global reach at the same time. We've also sought to overcome the barriers of time and space by introducing communications technologies, innovations. And I've shown here, obviously, a very simple innovation, but one of the two tin cans attached by a piece of string. And I'm sure many of you will have used this in your younger days. But going back in time again, we've not only had telegraphy, which was introduced in 1816, and this kind of telegraphy is either in the form of a tower with some semaphore signals, or once electricity was able to be harnessed, we were able to see a mechanism which allowed human beings to overcome some of the barriers of time and space. And further developments in 1897, Marconi conducted his first radio broadcast using wireless technologies. I think it was over the Bristol Channel in 1897, and the very first message that he sent using this new technology of radio was, "Are you ready?" And as time has progressed, we've moved into the era of mass communications, where we've combined asynchronous communications such as cinema and film with synchronous communications, people coming together in the same space to be able to share the same asynchronous communication. And getting now more into my time scale, asynchronous communications, then as they became more ubiquitous and cheaper, they brought technologies like the radio into the domestic environment. And with it, they brought consumer choice of different kinds of radio stations. And although my uncle was the very first person in our street to have a television set, and that was not until 1953, and he bought it because of the coronation of the Queen in 1953, like so many people, in our household, we didn't have a television set until I was 5 years old, and it looked like this. And again, mass communications bringing consumer choice. So in my lifetime, and certainly starting before that, we began to see the consumerization of communications technologies, starting arguably with telephony and the use of telephones to bring synchronous communications that overcame the barriers of time and space. And the picture on the far left with an early candlestick phone, you'll notice that it doesn't have a dial. So in those days, you would pick up the phone and you'd have to be connected to a human being on a switchboard, and you would have to say what you wanted. But as soon as we had the introduction of a dial and technologies such as Strowger switching, that you see the picture on the right, we began to enter the era of the consumerization of communications, synchronous communications technologies, overcome the barriers of time and space. And of course, business and the affordability of these technologies, business was the area where some of the new developments began to be introduced, developments such as the telex machines, which were first introduced in 1933 and were very common still when I began my first business in 1984. And in 1984, my business was based on a revolutionary piece of technology of its day, a consumer piece of technology called the IBM PC, which didn't have a hard disk. It had 2 floppy drives, and it was almost identical to the picture that you see on your screen now. And likewise, I've always been a fairly early adopter of technologies, and this looks like the kind of mobile phone, the Motorola mobile phone that I bought around about 1989, and I still wish that I kept it to this day as a museum piece. Going on in time, as the internet and the World Wide Web came into being between the years of 1974, in the very early days of the internet, to the World Wide Web in 1992, and the use of technology to be able to synchronously communicate via text. And in 1984, we began to see the beginnings of digital technologies with devices like the Palm Pilot, which was an early example of a personal digital assistant. So I would argue that 1992 was around about the time where we began to see the exponential developments in communications technology that have empowered consumers and businesses who have been able to harness the power of digital communications technologies. And at this time, this was a beginning of a revolution in both synchronous and asynchronous communications. But of course, whenever there is any new kind of technology, there are bound to be disruptions and challenges to implementing, as indicated by the little video that I'm going to show you now.
Broder Ansgar? Ja, det er deg, ja. Ja, så bra, ok. Ja, hei du. Hei du. Ja. Ja, hva gjelder det? Ja, det er denne her. Ja, vil du sitte? Takk. Ja. Jaha. Ja, så jeg har ikke fått gjort noen ting hele formiddagen. Okay, nei, jeg beklager at det tar tid. Altså, skjønner vi holder på å legge om til et helt nytt system, og da skal alle ha hjelp på en gang. Vet du? Ja. Så du kommer ikke inn i den, eller? Nei, den bare ligger der. Ok, har du forsøkt å åpne den? Ja, åpne den? Altså, hvis det hadde vært så enkelt, så hadde jeg jo ikke tilkalt helpdesk, hadde jeg vel? Nei, det er sant. Nei. Vil du ha en kopp varmt vann? Nei, da, det skal være fort gjort. Det skal vi se. Du bare gjør der. Sånn. Ja, da er du i gang. Ja, altså så langt kom jeg også. Ok. Men så stoppet det opp, og så var jeg redd for at noe av teksten skulle forsvinne, så jeg turte ikke å gå videre. Ja, ok. Nei, men du skjønner at inni her, så ligger det kanskje flere 100 sider med lagret tekst. Så for å komme videre, så tar du tak i et ark, på den måten her, og så sånn, blar du over på neste side sånn. Da fortsetter teksten der. Jeg blar, altså? Du blar, ja. Men når jeg skal tilbake da? Ja, da bare blar du tilbake igjen, tar tak der, og så gjør du sånn. Der, så er du tilbake til den teksten du hadde sagt, ikke noe... Ok, så den slutter der, og så så fortsetter den der, ja. Ok, men når jeg skal avslutte for dagen, hva gjør jeg da? Da bare slår du sammen permene. Ja? På den måten der. Sånn. Da er den lukket, der ligger alt lagret inni der. Altså, jeg risikerer ikke å miste noe av teksten her nå? Nei, alt ligger lagret inni her nå. Da må du i tilfelle sette fyr på hele greia. Det er kanskje litt sannsynlig. Så. Ja, ok. Nei, men for det er noe med det at liksom, når du har holdt på med skriftruller, så tar det litt grann tid å konvertere til å bla i en bøk. Ja. Ja, det er greit. Ja, men du, en til før du går. Jeg bare gå gjennom en gang til. Altså, jeg åpner... Sånn, ja, riktig. Og så, hva du kalte det? Blar. Jeg blar. Ja, blar videre. Blar frem og tilbake. Ja, teksten ligger der helt. Ja. Og når jeg er ferdig, så bare lukker jeg den. Oi. Flott. Fint det. Kjempefint. Ja, flott det. Ja, men du, vent, ikke sant? Nå er den sånn igjen, nå får jeg ikke åpnet den. Ja, du er fra feil side. Du må åpne fra andre siden. Så det er ikke likegyldig det, altså? Du må åpne fra den siden der. Sånn. Der. Der er den åpnet. Ja vel. Har du lest manualen, eller? Manualen? Jeg skal følge med som manualen som brukerveiledning. Det er sikkert den der. Der, vet du. Åja, den ja. Der står alt sammen. Ja, men ikke sant, der har du samme problemet. Får den ikke opp. Ok, det skulle vi kanskje ha tenkt på.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that and could see the point about it. So, in my lifetime, we've seen some, in fact, less than my lifetime, 30 years, we've seen some remarkable changes in both synchronous and asynchronous communication. I just want to run through some of those changes. So consumers have seen a quantum leap in that time from poor quality, limited access, single one-to-one voice channels to good quality global video group calls. So, we've seen from the 1980s, both speech synchronous communications and text chat, as exemplified by the Motorola brick phone and the IBM PC, to the 1990s, where we began to see one-to-many speech and video with these conference phones and also products like the Intel Team Station, which allowed you to use video conferencing technology to communicate with a number of different people, to the 2000s, and in my own experience, around about 2007, you see a couple of pictures there, one of which is the top picture is taken from the Serious Games Institute's auditorium, and one of the live virtual world events where we mix virtual world environment with a live seminar physically taking place at the Serious Games Institute. And underneath that, we see a product that was developed by a Birmingham company called Daden. It's called Datascape, and it allowed people to communicate synchronously within this virtual world environment where they could look at data represented in a variety of different formats, such as you see the globe and the map with indications of sea temperature. So quite remarkable transformations, and going on in time from there. In the 2010s, I was the project manager for HP Media Solutions and their virtual classroom, which brought additional power and capability in connecting people synchronously to share ideas with visual communications, to today where we have many-to-many consumer life video creative conversations and tools, such as the example on the right-hand side, which shows a screenshot from a new Facebook portal. So citizens now have unprecedented access to global communications in real time and on demand. And we've seen similar things happen over the last 30 years with asynchronous communications, going from the IBM PC to the use of video technologies to be able to record and share and publish videos like the one that you see on the right-hand side. I'm the CEO and founder of 360 in 360 Immersive Experiences. What I hope you can take away from my presentation will be a better understanding of what gamified immersive learning is, the kind of technologies that are involved, the costs and benefits, how you can create a gamified immersive learning application, and where and how you can access more information. So we've also gone asynchronous communications, looking at books, text, photographs and images, and videos. So it's these asynchronous communications that break the barriers of time and space. And if we look at asynchronous communications and break them down into text, we've seen the word processors of the 1970s. This is the IBM word processor. And in the space of 50 years, we've moved from that to tools which allow people to create their own interactive iBooks. And we moved from a situation where these technologies were only available to business users in the 1970s to increasingly where they're available for personal use by every citizen. It's not just text though, of course, it's also images and photos. And again, we've seen some remarkable changes from the 1990s, where the picture on the left shows a picture of me with my granddaughter Amy. And this was taken with a forerunner of the digital camera, the Canon Ion. And that was in the 1990s. The image was printed out on an HP LaserJet printer. And so in the space of 30 years, we've gone from the early days of digital photography to today, where we have professional quality photographic images that can be published online instantaneously through programs like mobile applications like Instagram. And the same also is true of video. In the 1990s, we were really limited in how we could publish and distribute video. And here's an early example of a video that was made of a project that I was involved in the 1990s. I'll just play that for you now.
It isn't just people in Market Harborough who have a vision about technology being used to develop communities. For some time now, the government has been working on a policy to make information technology accessible to everyone in society.
Hello, my name is Alex Allen and I'm the government's e-envoy. And my role is to ensure that the new information and communications technologies are accessible to everyone in our society. And these are exciting times, times when you can order almost anything you want from any part of the world. But it's also easy to forget.
So that was an interview with Sir Alex Allen, who was the government e-envoy at the time, round about the year 2000. We've gone from that to the kind of videos which ordinary citizens can create themselves, and here's a couple of examples.
Harness those skills and talents in the community to build its own social and economic wealth. And by making these new technologies widely accessible, you can create local jobs for local people. And by discovering...
This was a video that I showed at the very beginning. Is a rotating video of an aerial view of the city of Kuala Lumpur at night, taken with a consumer drone. So we've seen some quite remarkable and fantastic changes in the last 30 years. So what does it mean for humanity? Well, it means that we're living in a time of exponential change. It means that almost every day there are going to be some almost quantum changes in life. So tomorrow is not going to be the same as today. And whatever communications that we're able to make, particularly if we're using technologies like the technology we're using today, give you almost instant global impact. And with this, I believe there comes a disconnect between power and responsibility. And I'll go on to that in a bit more detail in a moment. And what this is leading to, in my view, is a more polarized society and a significant challenge to the sustainability and future of the human race. And here are some examples of the symptoms or effects of these developments in synchronous and asynchronous communications technology. And these are the consequences of the technologies that we are seeing today and increasingly we'll be seeing in the future. So clearly, the Black Lives Matter movement is something that arose in a matter of hours, at least, if not days and weeks. And it's still with us today. And that was because of global communications, asynchronous communications, the publishing and storing of videos at the time, and synchronous communications like Twitter and chat feeds, which allowed people to respond to this world-changing event and address what is a serious problem in society. It also means that we have young people like Greta Thunberg. You see the picture there. As a young teenager, she is able to reach audiences of millions and influence the behaviors, attitudes, and opinions of those people. Of course, topically and most recently, we've seen the disclosures by Harry and Meghan on their interview with Oprah Winfrey, which has been witnessed by tens of millions of people and overnight has had a major impact on a well-established institution like the British monarchy. And finally, on the right-hand side, we've got the so-called social influencers, people, mostly young people, I guess, but people of all ages, who have a very powerful presence on social media, whether that's Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, or whatever channels. They are able to tell their story and reach millions of people. But we should ask ourselves whether there is a disconnect here between the power of these technologies and the responsibility for the consequences of those communications. So what are we likely to see in the future of communications? Well, we have so many different social media channels, increasingly powerful in the richness of their content, the instantaneous nature of their communications, their global reach. And these communications are increasingly personalized. So if you look at Facebook and YouTube and LinkedIn, increasingly they're using the power of artificial intelligence to be able to direct whatever communications you have, whether they're asynchronous or synchronous, to a targeted audience which is likely to have similar interests to you and be able to respond. And this is not just a local impact, it's a global impact. And it uses artificial intelligence to have maximum impact. So looking at the future, I mentioned the idea of holodecks in the banner for promoting this event. How long is it going to be before we actually see this kind of technology become a reality? I'd like to show you another little video now, which gives an example of something that I've been doing with virtual reality, immersive technologies. Video, which is meant to indicate what you might see in the future. So here I am in a Victorian classroom.
The Back to the Future School of Digital Medicine, a magical place where medicine of the future is shared in a classroom of the past. Take time to look around the walls and hear the expert teachers' stories. Seek out the invisible wall of fame.
So I tried to use some of the techniques of Harry Potter that are now available to
My
consumers.
background is originally in film and television, special effects.
And see the invisible wall of fame, where I can select a name.
I'm Devi Kohli. I'm co-founder and CEO of AI Solve Limited and i3 Simulations, which is our new startup on health.
Just a simple example.
So I'm co-founder and CEO at AI Solve Limited.
So these remarkable changes that we have seen and we're likely to see in the future, what it means, I believe, is that if we go back to this original premise, that it's intelligence, combination of intelligence, asynchronous and synchronous communications, which has led to the development of civilization. And today we have intelligence, which is no longer constrained by the barriers of language, time, or space. So developments in artificial intelligence, speech recognition, automatic translation, all of these things are breaking down the barriers of time and space. And so the impact of these technologies and their ability to create tribal communities, which in turn will lead to empires and dynasties, these happen over incredibly short timescales. And they happen by breaking down the barriers of language, space, and time. And it happens by combining artificial intelligence and wireless, asynchronous, and synchronous communications technologies. So is all of this a good thing? And what could possibly go wrong? Well, I would like to use an analogy, and I described it in my book that I wrote in 2012, and that is that I think communications technologies are very analogous to the technologies of nuclear power. The invention and the breaking of the atom has led to the use of these technologies both to be harnessed for the good of mankind in the case of nuclear power stations, or for very destructive purposes for the atomic bomb. And I see a very strong connection between the technologies of nuclear power and what's happening with communications technologies. Because, as I mentioned, when human beings were constrained by physical limitations of space and time, the development of these tribes and civilizations happened over long period of time. But as we've reached today, where we've got global reach and instantaneous communication, we are creating a very, very reactive situation, which is analogous to what goes on within a nuclear reaction. And I think we have to think about how we use these powers for good or evil. But look, we're now in the middle of a crisis, and we have this thing called COVID-19, which is having a profound effect on the world that we live in. So here are some of the effects of COVID-19. It's driven the use of technologies for synchronous online meetings. This has been the way in which we've been able to overcome the barriers of time and space, and the fact that children can't go to school, families can't meet each other over distances. It's really driven the use of these technologies to communicate synchronously online. It's also resulted in deserted town centres and many retail businesses on the verge of going out of business. And of course, it's resulted in fleets of grounded aircraft. So COVID-19 has reimposed some of the barriers that we've had throughout history, the barriers of time and space. COVID-19 has impose those same barriers today against our will. It's also seen increases in online shopping. People who've never used online shopping before have now been able to and increasingly order goods via Amazon. We've seen the growth of meal deliveries from people like Deliveroo, and we've seen the rise and growth of numerous community initiatives like the food bank that we see there. So COVID-19, by reimposing some of these barriers of time and space to our ability to communicate, has created a new way of living. So things to think about as we go into looking at how we respond to these changes are what kind of effects these exponential changes are having on human life and humanity itself. What's the impact of consumerization of digital technologies and artificial intelligence? How are we going to respond to putting this enormously powerful technologies in the hands of everyday citizens? Can we turn COVID-19, instead of being a challenge and a disruption to our everyday lives, can we change this into an opportunity? And what's important here, I think, is the need to balance the needs of the individuals and society. And as I mentioned, just reflect on whether these developments in communications technologies are going to be harnessed for the power of good in society, or are they going to be used for destructive purposes? So to sum it up, are we on the eve of self-destruction or on the dawn of a new age? So I've reflected on a few paradoxes of human life, and I very much see the philosophy of yin and yang being very much applicable here. I think human life itself is a paradox. So that is the conclusion of my presentation. Before I go into talking, responding to some of the comments and questions that I've had, I've had some comments from Zelen Portal, reflecting, thanks for the nice history review, saying that there was no sound. I'm not sure where that one was. And Zelen says, what do you think of the missing of physical presence on online meetings? What type of verbal and non-verbal communication can we use if we'd like to influence and make an impression? Okay, so I'm coming back on the screen now to try to respond to those. I'm sorry if there was no sound. I need to have a check on that after the event, because this event has been recorded. And so my plan is to publish the recordings at a later date, and I'll be able to check where there was a problem with the sound. So what do I think of the missing physical presence in online meetings? Well, going back in time, and I do go back a long way in time to the early days of video conferencing, which is, I suppose, analogous to the modern Zoom and meetings like this. At the time that early conference room video conferences were introduced, everybody thought it was going to be the next big thing because it would result in enormous savings in time and the cost of travel, etc. And of course, the same is true today. But video conferencing in the early days never really took off. I mean, there were some reasons for that, in the context of the quality of the video that you would get on these early video conferencing systems. But the main reason why video conferencing and online meetings did not take off in the way that a lot of people expected was because the experience was inferior to the physical meeting that takes place with person-to-person conversations. So I can see that we will be likely to witness some developments in this space that will try to introduce some of this level of immersion and enhance physical connection between people. It may be through something like holograms and some kind of haptic technology. It's already technically possible to bring people into a same virtual or physical environment. And I can think of a number of different applications which I think are quite possible to occur within the next few years. And amongst these applications, as an example, one of the things that I've done over the last few years is to use 360-degree video recordings to capture events and memories. So there's been things like the Remembrance Day parade, where I recorded a church service, the parade through the village, the laying of the poppy wreath, and a range of different things. And I turned this into a 360-degree immersive video. So anyone wearing a virtual reality headset would be able to basically relive that experience. So what I see is a significant growth in the use of these technologies for the same kind of purpose. And as an example, it might be that people who want to leave a legacy of their memories now have the tools to be able to create their own immersive living memories. And it may be a trite example, but if you have someone who is conscious that they are reaching the end of their life, they may wish to leave a message to their family, their children, and their friends. So you can imagine this scenario, whether it is at their funeral or whether it is at the reading of the will, that the people present at this event will put on a virtual reality headset and they will be transported to an environment where they have the sense and feeling that they are in the presence of the person who is no longer with them. Either them reading out their will and talking to the individuals involved in the will, or sharing memories of family life over a period of time. So we have a unique opportunity today to be able to capture those kinds of things and share them for future generations in an asynchronous way. So I don't know whether that answers your question, but I hope it's being useful. I am seeing the comments that come through YouTube, and I understand that I should also be able to see comments from anybody who's watching this on Facebook Live, but those are the comments that we've had so far. So what I'd like to do just briefly is just bring up a banner on the screen. If you have enjoyed this presentation, and if you would like to discuss collaboration with me or discuss some of the challenges and opportunities that you are facing as a result of developments, not just in communications technologies particularly, but digital technologies in general, I would love to have a conversation with you, and very much hope that you will join me for the rest of the series of talks that I'm going to give over the next few weeks. What I would like to do, I think also, is to just introduce another piece of humor into this conversation, to show you a video that was recorded several years ago, but it's a really comic interpretation of developments in speech recognition and artificial intelligence. It lasts about 3 or 4 minutes, so I'll play it for you now and give you time to think of any questions that you might have before we draw this talk to a close.
What's the buttons?
Oh no, they installed voice recognition technology in this lift. I heard about this.
Voice recognition technology in a lift in Scotland. You ever tried voice recognition technology?
No.
They don't do Scottish accents.
11.
Could you please repeat that?
11.
11. 11.
11.
Could you please repeat that?
11.
Whose idea was this? You need to try an American accent.
11. 11.
That sounds Irish, not American.
No, doesn't it?
11.
Where in America is that? Dublin?
I'm sorry. Could you please repeat that?
Try an English accent, right?
11. 11.
You for the same part of England as Dick Van Dyke?
Let's hear yours then, smart ass.
Please speak slowly and clearly.
Smart ass.
11.
I'm sorry. Could you please repeat that?
11. If you don't understand the lingo, away back home to your own country.
Ooh, is that talk now, is it? Away back to your own country?
Oh, don't start, Mr. Bleeding Heart. How can you be racist to a lift?
Please speak slowly and clearly.
11. 11. 11. 11.
You're just saying it the same way.
I'm going to keep saying it until I understand Scottish, alright? 11. 11. 11. 11.
I'll just take his anywhere, you cow. Just open the doors.
This is a voice-activated elevator. Please state which floor you would like to go to in a clear and calm manner.
Calm. Calm. Where's that coming from? Why is it telling people to be calm?
Because they knew they'd be selling this to Scottish people who'd be going up for nuts at it.
You have not selected a floor.
Aye, we have! 11!
If you would like to get out of the elevator without selecting a floor, simply say, "Open the doors, please."
Please? Please? Suck my wally.
Maybe we should just say please.
I'm not begging that for nothing.
Open the doors, please.
Please? Pathetic.
Please remain calm.
Oh, you went up tonight. Get up there. Hey, just wait for it to speak.
You have not selected a floor.
Ah, mules, you cow! You don't let us through these doors. I'm going to come to America. I'm going to find whatever desperate actress gave you a voice, and I'm going to go in an electric chair for you.
Scotland, you bastard!
Scotland!
Scotland!
Scotland! Free!